Good morning, Eden. My name is Josh, and I'm also here with Josh, and we're excited to be here for episode 8 of the Good Morning Eden podcast. We created the podcast so that we can start seeing things in God's way. And the world is a big, scary place sometimes, and it's made easier to see through with Jesus' tainted lens, which is pretty cool. So in this episode, we will be looking at Mark chapter 4 and all of Mark chapter 4, verse 35, all the way to the end of chapter 5, which is going to be a really long one, but we're excited about these ones because there's lots of stories.
Yeah, it's like 3, maybe 4 stories all crammed in, so it's easy for us to get through.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay.
Thanks.
I am going to read now. Mark chapter 4, verse 35 to 43. Okay. That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let's go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall, or storm, came up, and the waves broke over the boat, so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." They went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain, for he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day, among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." And he begged Jesus again not to send them out of the area. A large herd of pigs was feeding in the nearby hills. The demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs, allow us to go into them." He gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told people what had happened to the demon-possessed man and told about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, "Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So the man went away to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized the power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" You see the people crowding against you, his disciples answered, and yet you ask who touched me? But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Overhearing what they'd said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? This child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother, the disciples who were with him, and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha koum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately, the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat.
Wow.
Yeah, quite the story.
Quite the story. I think what's crazy about this is all happening in one 24-hour period.
Yeah,
It only just hit me because I love how we're reading big chunks because this whole chunk, ever since the end of, chapter 4, 35 onwards to now, is one day.
Yeah, maybe less, could be half a day.
Dude, Jesus was a busy guy.
Yeah, just getting stuff done. I don't know. I actually don't know how long it takes. I should look this up, how long it actually takes to cross to the other side of the lake.
Yeah.
And back. Anyway, next time.
Yeah. Well, this is cool. So in this passage that we read, it's 4 stories, and each story is Jesus doing something significant that ultimately reveals a little bit more of his identity to his disciples and the people around him. So it's super exciting to dive into each of these stories.
Yeah, it's interesting. I noticed a few places said that, commentaries that I read, they said it's a sequence of 3 dramatic narratives. But I'm but there are 4. I don't know why people maybe they don't count the woman with the bleeding issue as significant, but I'm she was bleeding for 12 years, man. That's significant. Make it 4. I don't know why. So I don't know why. I'm going to say, despite what the commentators say, I'm going to say there are 4 dramatic stories. So.
Well, Big Laz says it's 4.
Nice.
Big Laz, commentator Big Laz.
He's back. He's back for another round. If you missed Big Laz, you got to watch the last couple of episodes.
Yeah, I can't even remember where that started.
I don't know either.
But yeah, because at the end of the day, the woman that was bleeding, that's the Mark and sandwich right there.
It is.
And we'll get into that.
Yeah, we will. But maybe before we go through each story, we'll give a little bit of a flyover of why all of these stories are put together.
Do it.
And then we'll dive into each one.
Yep.
So essentially, these all happen together, and I think Mark, the way he writes this gospel, he intentionally, I'm sure there was actually other stuff that happened in between these things, but he intentionally noted all of these stories and pressed them together, what I believe, to show Jesus's power. But interestingly, he starts, I'll get into more of that, but I think he showed to demonstrate Jesus' power over, firstly, natural elements with the sea, then spiritual elements or demonic forces, then onto the human body and health with the woman, with the blood, and then finally, victory even over death.
Yeah.
So they're kind of all together showing this incredible authority that Jesus has.
Yeah.
So that's significant. I think it'd be easy to just read these and think they're just these awesome miracles, but they actually each show something significant about Jesus. When you put them all together, it creates this awesome picture.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you had anything to add to that overview, or should we just dive into the?
Let's dive in.
Dive into the storm.
Let's dive into the storm.
Okay.
Yeah. So the storm takes place in Mark. It's Mark 4, verse 35 to 41. And I thought it was really interesting because I learned that apart from fishermen, Jewish people didn't like water.
Right.
Yeah, they didn't like hanging out on the water because from the sea, in the Jewish people's like minds, the sea was the place of darkness. It was the thing that threatened to destroy God's good creation and his purposes and his people. And you get that idea all throughout the Old Testament because, number one, the world in Genesis chapter 1 is this chaotic water. Mm-hmm. And then you follow the stories, and even when you get to Daniel 7, when Daniel 7 is talking about all the prophecies and the monsters, the monsters are coming out of the sea. Yep. And so, the Jewish people didn't like water except for fishermen, which they kind of had to do to survive. Yeah. Like to fish to survive.
Yeah. And we've mentioned that a few times on the show already. Yeah. It's kind of like this incredible Eden reflective narrative that just keeps bouncing through the Bible over and over and over again. Yeah. So sorry, continue.
No, that's it.
Yeah. I can't remember what's the Hebrew tohu
vavohu.
Tohu vavohu. I stumble over it. But that's the world was formless and void at the very beginning, and that's the whole thing that God like calms that and he tames the sea.
Yep.
And then the flood is the reverse of that. It's like he allows the sea to be untamed for that period of time. And then that's what creates the flood on the world in the story of Noah. Yep. So, definitely can see why they didn't like it. If that's your history, like, fair enough. And so, anyway, we start off with this story of the storm. Fun fact, actually, Mark 35 to 41. This is the first exegesis I ever wrote at college, was on this passage. Yeah.
That's crazy.
It is. So you'd think I'd be an expert at it, but that was a very long time ago.
An exegesis, for those that don't know, is literally an essay that gets into the historical and cultural context of the passage at hand.
Yep.
And you have to write a lot of words about it.
A lot of words, yeah. And I remember telling my friend I had to write an exegesis, and they thought I said a letter to Jesus. They're like, theology students do some weird stuff. And I was like, I'd much rather write a letter to Jesus. Anyway, okay. So this great windstorm comes up.
Yep.
Some interesting little facts here. The Sea of Galilee is a lake over 600 feet below sea level, right?
Yep.
So 180 meters below sea level, situated in a basin surrounded by hills. And so what would happen? Cold air from the hills comes down, and with the warm and humid air around the lake, it would just cause storms quite rapidly.
Yep.
But obviously, at least some of the people in the disciples were fishermen. So this storm must have been... They're probably used to their storms on the Sea of Galilee. So I'm guessing that this storm, from the way the story is told, was either particularly bad or came on particularly fast. Something about it was particularly off-putting, even for those experienced fishermen.
Yeah.
So this is a significant storm.
Yep.
I guess when we read this, it's not a little gust.
And the storm, like this storm thing, it's not just Bible time stuff. N.T. Wright was, like when I was reading N.T. Wright about this, he's saying even today, like you go... and the weather changes so fast.
Oh, really?
Like you can experience that today.
Wow.
So you can understand how this storm can kind of come out of nowhere.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I remember reading even when I used to live in New Zealand, but people would get the boat between the North Island and the South Island. Can't remember what it's called right now, but you catch it from Wellington or something and you go down. But even there, similar sort of setup.
Yeah.
All these mountains around, and so the storms would come up really quick. And even on those giant modern boats, like I read stories of people on the boats and the waves would get so big it would like smash the front windscreens and stuff, and the water would come through. So yeah, it's pretty like storms on a boat. It sounds real scary. I haven't really experienced this, but I can understand these people freaking out. But what I don't understand about this story, I mean, I have ideas, but what I really don't understand about this story is how Jesus was sleeping in the storm. Like, I like sleeping in my bedroom in the rain, on a rainy night, but on a boat, like it would have been swaying and rocking around, and a couple of commentators I read, they said that Mark deliberately mentioned this, it's true, but he made sure to mention this because it actually shows the humanity of Jesus. Like you're about to see this crazy, overwhelming authority of Jesus unfold over these 4 stories, yet it starts with a very human, exhausted Jesus.
Yeah.
Like right there, just needing to sleep in the boat. And I guess thinking about it, like he was probably so exhausted, but I guess there would have also been an element of just pure trust in God.
Yeah.
That it didn't even bother him.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I think it was James Edwards, a scholar that I was reading. This is the only place in the Gospels that Jesus is sleeping. And it's crazy that it's in the midst of a storm. And James Edwards, it attributes it to, I guess what you're saying about the humanity, but also the fact that he can completely trust God even in the midst of chaos in his life. He's like, it's all going to be okay. So that's trust.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I've been seasick before. I did not trust. I wanted off the boat.
Yeah. Oh man. And it was interesting reading again John Dibdall, or the Andrews Bible Study Notes, which they've actually been so good for this. So would highly recommend. But he says that the miracle demonstrated that Jesus has authority over nature. He rebuked the storm in the same manner he rebuked the unclean spirit, which is interesting.
That was interesting.
In chapter 1, verse 25. So similar kind of words. It almost makes you feel like, was this storm like supernatural in any way? I don't know. But the words he commanded were meant to muzzle the storm. So it was commanded for the storm. So a more forceful translation would have actually been shut up, be calm, which I'm like, I wish the NIV translated it to shut up. Like, hey, storm, shut up. Isn't that just like an amazing, it just totally changes it. Like that it would have just, like he rebuked it.
Yeah.
Not just was like, hey, chill out. He was just like, I love that idea.
Yeah, that is actually cool. I I was reading that, the idea that it was Jesus rebuking the storm, it kind of links to what happens next into the next story, where it's kind of like these demonic powers knew that Jesus was coming and they were trying to stop Jesus. And if it's this idea of like Jesus told the storm to shut up, it's kind of Jesus is being like, be quiet, I've actually got something to do and I'm coming. Like,
yeah, interesting. That's a cool perspective.
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting perspective.
Yeah, so there's another element of like the disciples freaking out that they're like, don't you care, Jesus? And he kind of rebukes them as well. A bit of a softer way, but he rebukes them. He's like, don't you get it? Still, like, of course I care about you, and I want you to trust God. But I'm like, I wonder how was the story. If it was like ideal, were they all meant to be asleep in the boat, just chilling out through this, and it all would have been fine? I don't know. Yeah, so I'm trying to think of what the disciples were meant to do.
Yeah, this is one instance that I don't understand Jesus's like rebuke to the disciples, because I would have been scared.
Yeah.
And so I think I still need to read this and meditate on this for way longer, because I don't have the answer to it. But yeah, you're right. What were they meant to do?
Yeah.
Except to kind of be a little bit scared.
Yeah, and I think fear is normal, but obviously their fear had gotten to a point where they had no trust left by the looks of it. So I'm thinking, and again, this is speculation. This is kind of challenging to read the Bible and think about, well, how was it meant to go down?
Yep.
And you don't always get the answers. You just have to kind of have a guess. But when I've been thinking on this passage, I think maybe it was fear is normal.
Yep.
It was a normal situation to be scared in, and they should have been scared. Fear is... It's a God-given gift sometimes to be fearful or anxious, because it's what keeps us safe. It's what actually helps us to work on something and perform well. So we can't try and shut out fear and anxiety altogether. They're a normal part of our human makeup.
Yep.
And in some ways, it's a superpower. But it should have led them to maybe more trust. Like maybe if they'd come and said, Lord, we're scared, but we trust you that you can do something about this. We trust that you're in the boat with us. And yeah, we trust that even if it seems like you're sleeping, that you've still got a plan and you're taking us ahead, and whatever your will is will be done.
Yep.
Maybe that's how it was supposed to go. That's my most human approach to it. Like, other than them being like, guys, let's just come together and sing "It Is Well." Like, you know what I mean? I don't know how it was meant to go, but. Yeah, so some interesting thoughts there, and a very compelling story.
Yeah,
that leads us so well. I think we get. Do you want to jump to the next story?
Well, the last thing I want to say about this story, in verse 41, the disciples were terrified and they asked each other, "Who is this? Even the winds and waves obey him." I think the reason why they questioned who is this is because all in the Old Testament, you look at Psalm 65, Psalm 89, Psalm 104. You look at Genesis chapter 1. Only God had the authority over the wind and the waves.
Yes.
And, especially Psalm 107, Psalm 107, it talks about God stirring up a tempest at sea. Sailors are scared. They cry out to God in distress, and God stilled the storm to a whisper, and the waves of the sea were hushed. And, you get that psalm, and then you get this story of Jesus doing that exact same thing of causing the waves to come to a hush. And the disciples are like, man, that's the same thing that God does in the Old Testament. Oh, well, in their Bible, like it's in the Hebrew Bible. That's what God was doing. And so it's kind of Jesus was showing them, I am that guy. I am him, so.
It's a good morning Eden moment.
That is a good morning Eden moment.
You're seeing Eden. That's the place where God come, the tohu vavohu.
Yeah.
And now he's doing it again.
Yep.
Wow. And we can go into Revelation when it says about how one day there'll be no seas at all.
Yep.
And I'm just like, wow, he's going to do it again.
Yep.
Okay, I can preach. But we're doing a podcast, so all right, that's good. That's a good word. Thank you, Josh. All right, let's charge on.
Yep.
So they get through it. Jesus calms the storm. They arrive at the other side. And they are met at the other side with a terrifying experience.
Yeah. So I want to do like a meta reflection over chapter 5, if you would allow
a meta reflection.
A meta reflection over chapter 5.
I'm excited.
So chapter 5, in every story, it presents someone that is ritually unclean. In this story, it's the demon-possessed guy. In the second story with Jairus, it's with his daughter who's dead. And then the third person is the bleeding woman, obviously. Yep. And so you may have heard in the Bible, for those listening, the idea of, people being unclean or impure and people being pure or clean. So this was part of Jewish life every single day. And so being unclean and being clean and then being holy are like 3 categories that the Jewish people had in their way of life. And so it had nothing to do with one's morality, but it had everything to do with the symbolism that helped portray, I guess, the Garden of Eden ideal and how we're not in that Garden of Eden ideal. And so being unclean, certain actions or certain things were considered unclean according to Jewish law. Look at Leviticus, and you can kind of look at that. And so if you were to come into contact with certain animals, bodily discharges, skin diseases, with death of any kind, you would then be unclean. And the reason why you'd be unclean is because anything that was associated with death was associated with uncleanliness, because death can't actually be in the presence of God.
Wow.
And so if you were unclean, like if your uncle or if someone died in your family, or if you came across someone that was sick, or if your wife or you had a bodily discharge, then you, in the Jewish mind, were associated with death. And because of that, you couldn't go and worship at the temple. You couldn't go worship at the tabernacle. And it's, like I said, it had nothing to do with being morally compromised, but it was just a Hebrew symbolism of saying death can't be in God's presence. And so to get ritually pure again, so to become clean or pure, they are the same thing. You would either have to do a waiting game where you have to wait a week, or you have to wait a month, or wait a day, depending on what it is that you come into contact with or what disease you may have had. And then you could do special purification baths, and then you would be clean. And if you were clean or pure, you had the opportunity to go and worship at the temple, or the tabernacle. You could go make your sacrifices, and you were allowed to come into God's presence again. And God was able to God was able to meet with you in that sense, and God was able to make holy things that are clean. So that's and that had a lot of relevance to the priesthood and whatnot. And what is unclean about the demon-possessed man? The demon-possessed man in this story, he's like the unclean, he's the epitome of unclean. Because when you look at him, he's an impure spirit. So number one, he's been possessed by an impure spirit.
Yep.
So number one,
off to a bad start.
Off to a bad start.
Yeah.
He lives in the tombs, not a great seconder, because he's surrounded by dead people and death. And no one could subdue him, and he cuts himself. And so his life force, his blood is leaving his body. So this guy is the epitome of unclean. And so you come into this story, and instead of in the old way of doing things where, they had to do certain things in order to be clean again, the source of holiness is now moving into the scene. And and he's about to do something crazy. And the source of holiness, spoilers, is Jesus, who's about to reshape the disciples and the people around him's mind about what God is actually wanting to do for the world. And I think that's pretty cool. So we're going to continue to explore that now.
Nice, great, thank you.
But I'll hand it back over to you.
Yeah, okay, awesome. So they get there. And actually, speaking of the, so the demon refers to himself as Legion.
Yep.
A legion was the largest unit of the Roman army, consisting of up to 6,000 men. It's a big unit.
It's a lot.
It's quite the unit. So whether it means that there were literally 6,000 or maybe there was just a lot of demons, we're not exactly sure. But they do go into 2,000 pigs. So if there was one per pig,
a real lot.
yeah, that's still 2,000. That's still a lot of,
I wonder what this guy must have been skitzing out.
Yeah, his mind, I can't imagine what this guy was going through.
Yeah.
So, look, there's a lot of interesting thoughts around this story, and I don't think we have time to really go into every possible, every possible meaning, and I don't know, but I know a lot of people get really troubled by this story because, especially in today's day and age, people love animals, and fair enough. I love animals too, and they see what? Why do all those pigs have to die? That doesn't seem fair at all. To the pig, and I again totally get it. And so I think this story can be a lot troubling for some people. But again, there's a lot of symbolism in this. So the herd of pigs. Pigs were definitely an unclean animal. They were the signature of an unclean animal because they were, not one of the so. In the Old Testament, there's a definition between clean animals that you can eat, and then there are even that you use for animal sacrifices. But then there are unclean animals that they're not supposed to eat. If you eat it, you are unclean.
And they are unclean because they're associated with death. So pigs, they eat the scavengers, the scraps of society. So you don't want to be consuming the thing that consumes the scraps of society.
Yeah. And same with prawns or whatever, they are the ocean's vacuum cleaner. They're just going along the bottom, just eating all the junk.
Yep.
So that's the idea. And interestingly enough, clean and unclean, the definition is there well before Leviticus, because even Noah seems to know which animals are clean and unclean. So it seems to be a big deal.
Yeah, true.
So it's something that continues on. So these people, they've gone to the other side of the lake. This was not, as far as we understand, not Jewish territory anymore. These were people who were probably Gentile who didn't really care about any of this stuff. So they had pigs, he was chilling in a graveyard, all of this kind of stuff.
And Gentiles are unclean.
Yeah.
I forgot to say that before.
True, yeah. Really a lot of
uncleanliness.
A lot of uncleanliness in this story. And so I think what's interesting about this story, I don't think this is necessarily Jesus going and starting a Gentile mission. I think it's just Jesus... I think it was kind of a cool-off from all the ministry he had been doing around all the Jewish people. So he went to the other side of the lake, so it just, to get... But also, there was obviously something he wanted to achieve. But also, he just heals people. He just helps people when they're in need. And so that's where this story... Now, this story actually uses a lot of really interesting language. Now, one scholar that I was reading, Ben Witherington, who I've quoted a few times, he quotes another scholar, and they have this idea, Schweizer is the other scholar's last name. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But they actually think that this story was meant to be a bit humorous. There's a bit of humour tucked in there.
Yeah, okay.
And this has actually helped me deal with this story. Somebody who loves animals and has been sad by this story before, it's helped me understand maybe that this story, I wasn't reading it right because I don't have all the
facts.
The facts or the background understanding. So let me give you an idea of how it might be humorous. You don't have to agree with this, but hear me out. So obviously the pig had become a sense of the symbol of paganism. So much so that the Romans who occupied that area of Palestine, their symbol on their flags and stuff was actually a boar.
Oh, wow.
Then they did it as a part of a thing to sort of tease the Jews because they knew they didn't like pigs, so they put boars everywhere.
Yeah, right.
And so much so that D.M. Merritt, he points out that there's a lot of military language being used in this story.
Yeah.
So a legion is a Roman military term, right?
Yeah.
And then the military metaphor is used to indicate that many demons were involved, acting like a military force who's taken over and occupied something. JDM Merritt. JDM Derritt. Man, why am I so bad at pronouncing this? I'm so sorry, JDM Merritt. Derritt, whatever you know. I'm sorry. It's like, he's got so many. Okay, all right.
Just call him Derritt.
Derritt. The term for herd is a Greek word. Agele. It's not the normal thing you'd use for a herd of pigs, not the normal term you'd use. It's actually more used of a band of military recruits.
Oh.
Yeah. And also the phrase when he dismissed them, when Jesus dismissed the demons, that's a military term again. And likewise, the final military term is that the pigs charge into the water.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of interesting military words being used, and I think that's kind of meant to be a bit of like a joke here. That it's like, these demons were meant to be so posed as being all strong and mighty and whatever.
Yep.
But they end up getting taken out by pigs.
Yeah.
You know? And so I guess people have three options when it comes to why the demons went into the pigs. So it could either be, what are the three options? Let me think through. Sorry. Jesus cast them into the pigs because the demons wanted to go into the pigs to die, but that doesn't really make sense because the demons didn't want to die.
Yeah.
So I don't think they wanted to go in there. Jesus made the pigs go crazy so that it would kill the demons, but that also doesn't really seem characteristic for Jesus. So the final option is that the demons went into the pigs, but then the pigs were like, we don't want this. We're going to take you out ourselves. And they charged out.
Oh.
And that's meant to be the humorous thing. It's just like they did all of this stuff to try and avoid it and end up getting taken out by like the definition of an unclean animal, the pigs.
Okay.
Yeah. It's an interesting perspective on the story.
That is different.
It is, isn't it? Yeah. So that's what I read when I read it. And I was like, oh, wow. Like, so like when that part happened, that would have been like the punchline of the story. Of being like, wow, they did that. The pigs won in the end.
The unclean thing is the one that was in a way like one of the heroes of the story.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. But the pigs take the demons back to where they're meant to be, which flows on to what you were saying before.
Yeah, back into the chaos.
Into the chaos waters, back to where they belong. The pigs take them back there because the pigs know that's where they belong.
That's wild.
It's wild, isn't it? Yeah. So an interesting story that leaves me asking a lot of questions still. I'm like, I don't know. I'm learning about the story.
Yeah.
But what I find really interesting about it is that after this guy is healed, he wants to follow Jesus, but Jesus doesn't let him follow him.
Yeah, that is interesting, hey?
Yeah.
Because the same words, like he's basically asking to be a disciple.
Yeah, he is. And it seems genuine too. Like, it seems like he'd be a good recruit. Like, imagine his story, you know? Like, I was healed of like thousands of demons.
Yep.
And you'll never believe this whole thing with the pigs, you know?
Yeah.
But like, I guess what I find interesting is that Jesus says no, but then he does something really different. He's just like, go and tell them.
Yep.
You know? Go and tell the people what had happened, which again is like because everybody else he told them to keep quiet, but this guy, he says, go to your own people and tell them what the Lord's done for you. Why? My theory is that because he was Gentile, like Jesus wasn't at a stage where having a Gentile disciple would have been helpful for the mission, I think. And so he healed the guy, and maybe this was sort of like just like the very first, like the floodgates of the dam just like starting to open to the Gentiles. Like it was like, all right, you go and tell. And how powerful is that? You know, like when Jesus has done something for you, go and tell. Like go and tell people what he's done. Be faithful to what he's done. So, anyway, I think it's really, and maybe this is a little thing that everybody's discipleship journey is a bit different. Yeah. For some, Jesus says, be quiet and just hold on to that story. For others, he's like, go and tell. So I don't know. A lot of interesting little... did you have anything to add to this story?
No, just to end off on that story as well. Like Jesus' final words, he says, go home and tell your own people how much the Lord has done for you, and how he's had mercy on you. So the men went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for them. And so it's like the Lord and like Jesus are equated as the same thing there, which is an interesting kind of wordplay from Mark. I think we should kind of recognize that.
Yeah. Yeah, that is. I don't, yeah, okay.
I don't know what to say. But yeah, that's the story. The second story at least.
Yeah. So amazing, incredible story that seems to have so much to say. And then we continue on. Do you want to start us off with the,
Yeah, well, the last story, Mark chapter 5, verse 21 to 43, is another example of the classic Mark and sandwich. For those that may be joining us for the first time, Mark and sandwich is Mark would, in his gospel, will start off with the story about a certain set of characters and whatnot. Then it's almost like he interrupts his original story with a seemingly unconnected story, resolve that, and then come back to the original story at hand.
Yep.
But to understand everything, we must understand that middle section of the story. And it will kind of give light to everything else. So Mark's a really interesting storyteller. And yeah, so in this one we get the Jairus, he comes up to Jesus saying, man, my daughter's sick. And so Jesus goes up to help him. And then Mark interrupts with the story of the bleeding woman and how she is healed. And then the story picks back up again with Jairus' daughter being raised from the dead because she dies. So yeah, it's really interesting. And yeah, there are some interesting connections as well that I never realized, but Big Laz helped me see. Number one, both of the people that Jesus is ministering to in this chapter are women. One is a grown woman, one's a young woman. They're both in desperate, helpless states where they can't help themselves. One is terminally sick and one is, dead. And another thing that links the two together is number 12, because the girl that is sick in verse 42, we're told that she's 12 years old, and the woman had the bleeding ailment for 12 years. And so the numbers are linked together significantly because their stories are meant to mirror each other, like they're meant to explain each other.
Oh, I never noticed.
That's small things.
Yeah, 12. I was literally thinking before when I wrote, look, I wonder why they mentioned that she's 12. I'm like, 12 years. Oh my gosh. Yeah, all right.
Yeah. And so Jairus, he's the ruler of the Jewish synagogue in the area. And we kind of talked about synagogues before, but basically synagogues are basically Jewish churches. They're the places where they went to on Sabbath to gather, to worship, to hear their sermons. And I'm pretty sure throughout the week as well, that's where the kids would go to school and learn about things. So Jairus, he was the head of the synagogue, meaning that he was a pretty big deal in the sense of being one that people would know. And so if his daughter was sick, that was pretty scary for not just him, but the community, because they would have cared for this guy so much.
Yeah.
And so he obviously goes and he's heard about what Jesus has done, and so he wants him to come and heal her. And then the story is then not interrupted, but on the way to seeing Jairus' daughter, Jesus meets the woman. And so this woman, according to the Torah, she's unclean because in the Torah, I think in Leviticus 15. Yes, in Leviticus 15, it talks about how a woman that is on her menstrual period is not fit for, like, she's unclean. And so this lady has had that same problem for 12 years. And so it's not just, like, physically, that's tough. It's taxing on the body. But also spiritually, it means that she can't worship with people. She can't touch anyone, because if she touches anyone, then anyone that touches her is spiritual, is unclean. And so it's a very lonely place to be in. And she's had 12 years of this. So it's really, really sad. And it's interesting because she hears about Jesus and she believes that he has the power to heal her. And so she goes on like this secret mission to touch his robe. And she touches his robe, and Jesus and his power is able to heal her. And I love how it says she was freed from her suffering. I just love that. I love how the NIV puts that. She was freed from her suffering. And Jesus encounters her, finds her. And a couple of things about Jesus finding her. James Edwards, he says this quote, I'm just going to read it. The persistence of Jesus discovering who touched him rivals the woman's persistence in reaching Jesus. She wants a cure, whereas Jesus desires a personal encounter with someone. He is not content to dispatch a miracle. He wants to encounter a person. In the kingdom of God, miracles lead to meeting. Discipleship is not simply getting our needs met. It is being in the presence of Jesus, being known by him, and following him. And I just think that that's a beautiful picture of what discipleship is. And so Jesus says that she's healed. In verse 34, daughter, your faith has healed you. That is, in the Greek, the word heal is the same word for saved. And so it's kind of like her salvation is complete, like her healing, her spiritual and physical and emotional, all the aspects of her life, it's now completed because of what Jesus has done for her.
Yeah, like salvation and healing are intrinsically tied together in the Gospels.
Yep.
And I guess just that's still something we see today, that when we receive our salvation from Jesus, he is actually doing healing work in our hearts and in our bodies as well. Like he actually heals us of the suffering that sin creates us in our salvation. And that's demonstrated so well in this story. So just wanted to add that in. Continue.
Yeah, no worries. And so as we continue on to the story, it goes back to Jairus and his family, and he gets home and they tell him that the daughter's dead. So don't worry about it. But Jesus is kind of, he's just like,
I will worry about it.
He's like, just wait.
Yeah.
Like, just wait. He goes in, he heals her, and I lie. He doesn't even heal her. He raises her from the dead.
Yeah.
And
which is healing.
Yeah. Healing of the heart muscle starting. I don't know, whatever.
Healing of a very major condition. We
Yes.
haven't found a cure for it yet.
No one yet has found a proper cure.
No.
But what I found interesting about the passage is, if it is a Markan sandwich, and if the middle part of the story is meant to inform the outer parts of the story, then what is the purpose of the woman in the story, and what can we learn about it? And so the purpose of the sandwich is like faith, ultimately, like faith. But it's actually the role of faith. And here is what I think, here's another kind of quote from James Edwards. I'm just skimming over it now. Well, what does Mark accomplish by sandwiching the woman's story and the story of Jairus? Jairus and the woman only have one thing in common. Both are victims of desperate circumstances who have no hope apart from Jesus. Otherwise, their stories diverge sharply. Jairus, in this story, has a name and a position. As ruler of the synagogue, he has enough clout to summon Jesus to his house. The woman has none of these. Her name is not given or even remembered. She has no position. Her only identification is her shame. She must approach Jesus from behind, whereas Jairus approaches Jesus face to face. Jairus, in other words, is a person of status and privilege, but in the typical Markan irony, he does not hold any advantage regarding things that matter. It is the woman who exemplifies faith, and in this respect, the roles are reversed. Despite her embarrassing circumstances, she pushes through both the crowds and the disciples to reach Jesus. Her gender, namelessness, uncleanness, and shame, none of these will stop her from reaching Jesus. To this undaunted woman comes the healing and the liberating words, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." When Jesus says, "Don't be afraid, just believe," how should Jairus understand that command to believe? What kind of faith should he have? The answer is that he must have the same kind of faith that the woman had. The woman exemplifies and defines faith for Jairus, which means to trust Jesus despite everything to the contrary. That faith has no limits, not even the raising of a dead child. Wow. I know that was a little bit long.
It's good though.
But when I read that, I just thought it was interesting. You know, like Jesus told Jairus, hey, don't be afraid, just believe, just have faith. And the type of faith that Jesus was wanting Jairus to have was the faith that is exemplified by this bleeding woman, a faith that despite all the obstacles that stopped her from being able to see Jesus, that culture and society and that religion put in front of her, she believed that Jesus didn't care about that as much as he cared about her. And she was willing just to, with unabandoned surrender, just go and just trust in that. And Jesus is saying, like, that is the thing that is celebrated in this passage. You know, not like Jairus, as good as he was, nothing about Jairus was celebrated. But this nameless, forgotten woman, her faith is the thing that we should be learning from. And that informs the purpose of the whole Mark and Sandwich, that faith, this unabandoned surrender to Jesus, is what he most desires and most affirms.
So good.
Yeah, I really like that. But what about you? I've been talking for a while now. What are your thoughts?
No.
What have I missed?
Oh, look, no, I think
Everything.
you covered it really well. I mean, I see something interesting, I guess, with Jairus. Like, he goes to Jesus on behalf of someone else too, which I think is something I'm reminded of. Like, I can go to Jesus on behalf of another.
Yep.
And he can act on that behalf. But also, I don't know, like, I just find this story so interesting. Like, the whole thing, how they, like, Jesus is like, they're just sleeping and then they laugh. And I'm like, what is the deal with that? Like, anyway, but yeah, I really like the way Ben Witherington writes. He says, Jairus' daughter, as in 1 Thessalonians 5:10, sleep is the term a person uses for death when one believes in resurrection.
Whoa.
Isn't that cool?
That is actually really cool.
Yeah, it is. And
Say it again.
Okay, all right. Jairus' daughter, as in 1 Thessalonians 5:10, sleep is the term a person uses for death when one believes in resurrection.
That's so good.
And I think that's a good way to look at death. I mean, obviously, there are many Christians today who believe that when you die, your soul ascends off to heaven or to hell or something. I'm not into that. I think you're just sleeping until that day of the resurrection. And I think this passage kind of I know, not that that's what this is about, but it kind of shows it in a way, the way that Jesus talks about death is in sleep. And yeah, I don't know. For me, I find this story just so encouraging. And just the courage that woman would have taken with that issue to go and just touch the hem of Jesus' robe. Like, she's like, that's all I need.
Yep.
It's just touch his robe.
Yep.
Like, what a faith. What a faith. So yeah, incredible story here. And I guess one thing I want to point out too is that Jesus shows his authority over the storm, over the demonic, over the sick, and over death. But all of these things lead to people being able to worship Jesus freely. Like, he clears away the storm so that they can go on the mission with Jesus. He gets rid of the demons, and so the guy could be clean. And maybe I've even heard people talk about that's why Jesus got rid of the pigs, so that those people could start going to synagogue and stuff, is because they can't go if they're pig herders, you know.
Yep.
Maybe you know, that could be true too. But like all of that, he clears away all of those things. He's out of the tombs. He's not in the unclean space anymore. He's not cutting himself anymore, so he can go and worship. He raises Jairus' daughter from the dead. You know, and maybe if she died, maybe he would have been in the temple or something anymore. Like, obviously she would have, but now she can grow up being with Jesus too, like in that temple. Yeah. And the woman with the blood, she's clean. She can go to the temple now too. Like, all of these things, like, Jesus does this healing work in them, and it leads to being able to be with God, be with Jesus. And I think sometimes we look for Jesus to do these awesome things in our lives, and like, I don't have all the answers for why Jesus does some things and not others, but what I see in the stories of healing so much is that Jesus is kind of removing a blockage so that somebody can go on a deeper journey with their faith. Yeah, whatever that looks like. And that's when I seem to see, at least in my own life or in the life of others, that's when I seem to see Jesus moving in really amazing ways, when he's like clearing a blockage, you know, for somebody's faith journey. Yeah, and that's what I see in these stories too.
100%.
Yeah. But what's been a big thing you've learned from these stories? Like, if you were to just, everything we've learned, what's one thing that's really stuck out to you personally?
Yeah, I was thinking about that this morning as I was getting ready, and I did my morning devotion today, and in it I read Psalm 37 verse 5. And in Psalm 37 verse 5 it says, "Commit everything that you do to the Lord, trust him and he will help you." And I think that is that kind of summarizes everything for me that this passage is encapsulating. Like, you know, life is crazy. Yeah. And we may not be possessed by like 1,500 demons or whatever, but like we still have things around us that rattle us, and we still have worries and fears and doubts about things and things that we can't fix on our own. But I think the promise and the invitation that Jesus is giving us is commit those things to him, and he will help us. And that's why I love the psalm. It says he will help you, not might. It's he will. And we just got to be patient and trust that he will help us in his timing when it is right. And yeah, that's kind of my thoughts.
Yeah, no, that's great, man. For me, I was really reminded of, I guess, just like we talked about at the beginning, but just the authority of Jesus. Like, it's just so like easy for me to slip into Jesus just being like a good idea in a way, or like just a like good moral teacher, which obviously it is, and me to just reduce his power and authority to my experience. But when I read these stories, it's just a reminder that actually Jesus, he has authority over like everything.
Yeah.
And you read, like, one of my favorite books of the Bible is Colossians. It's amazing. But one part in particular is in Colossians chapter 1 verse 15 and onwards. It just says, the Son is the image of the invisible God. So Jesus, the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authority, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. I could keep going. It's really good. But like, just like that idea of like, this is who I'm worshiping. This is who I'm praying to. This is who I'm talking to. It's not just like, Lord, thank you for this food or whatever. Like, it's actually like, this is like the God of everything. He has authority over everything. Like, can I just pray like that for a minute? So yeah, for me, that was just really convicting. Just like, oh man, remember who you're praying to, and just celebrate that he wants a relationship with you, and he wants to be with you, and he's done everything for you. So anyway, that was a good reminder for me this week.
Yeah.
So let's do some quick reflection questions for people listening at home. I'll start us off.
Yep.
So dear listener, wherever you are right now, just take a moment and just try and think through what, your journey with Jesus. And these are just some reflection questions to help bring some application to what we've been learning about today. So my first question is, have you ever felt like Jesus was sleeping in the midst of your chaos or your storm?
My reflection question today is, Jesus wants to enter into the messy parts of your life. Where do you need to invite him into today?
And finally, the woman with the bleeding, she took a huge risk in going into that crowd to touch Jesus' robe. When's the last time you took a risk with your faith? Took a risk reaching out to Jesus or doing something for Jesus? And that's all for today.
That's us.
So thank you for listening or watching, however you're consuming this. We just love it if you share your thoughts, leave a comment, leave a review. It helps the podcast get the word out about what we're doing. And we also just love hearing your thoughts. But our prayer for you is that from the conversations today, that what we've been reading, that you would take a moment to have your mind go back to what it would have been like in Eden, to see the world the way that God wants us to see the world. So be blessed, grace and peace.